Hello, and welcome to a special episode of To Be More podcast. This is Conversation with the Candidates, the race for state's attorney. We're going to hear from 3 of the 4 candidates for state's attorney. We sent out invitations to all 4. However, we're going to hear from 3 of them. Those candidates are Roya Hanna, Thuru Vignaraja, and Ivan Bates. Hopefully, these 30-minute sessions, independent, will allow you to understand more about their platforms and where they stand and where they want to take the state's attorney's office should they be elected. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome again. And thank you, Ms. Roya Hanna, for joining us on the To Be More podcast conversation with the candidates. And you made the big, bold decision, one, to run for state's attorney of Baltimore, then not to run as a Democrat, which you were running as a Democrat to start, but run as an independent because you felt like the politics need to be taken out of such a position. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you're going to get the people of Baltimore, the Democrats who are the large voting base in Baltimore, to know who you are and why they need to vote for you.
You know, TJ, thank you so much for having me. This is my first time running for any office. And, you know, I'm not a politician. I haven't done this for years. And what I do have as my greatest strength is my principles. And the fact that I've been a prosecutor in this city for 12 years, I've been a defense attorney for 8, and I trained prosecutors for 3 years prior to both of those positions. And, you know, I think as far as the switch, once I realized that one thing that I was saying that really resonated with voters was getting politics out of public safety and putting their interests first. I think voters see that. They know that I'm genuine about that particular issue. And I don't want to ever have to make a decision based on party loyalty. I want to make a decision that is in the best interest of the public and ensuring public safety for all of the citizens of Baltimore.
Well, it's a commendable decision. And I think a lot of people genuinely ask that question when it comes to judges or state's attorneys, like, why are they Republican or why are they Democrat? Why does that matter? But that's the way the system is. So good for you going the independent route, but it seems like a tough road potentially. However, you know, you're in it with some big personalities. How do you feel like you can bust through in the crowd? I mean, Miss Mosby has a big personality as the incumbent. Then you have Thuru Vignaraja, who has a heck of a personality and has run a couple of times before for different offices. And Ivan Bates is another one with a big personality who's run for this office. You're the new kid on the block. How are you going to bust through?
Well, the fact of the matter is I have more prosecutorial experience than any of them. And as far as murders are concerned, I tried more homicides than all 3 of them combined. Homicides are the biggest issue in this city, and we need somebody who knows how to handle them, and not somebody who's dabbled a little bit or maybe sat second chair or whatnot, but somebody who's gone down in the middle of the night, met with victims' families, met with the witnesses, worked with the detectives on how to strengthen their cases, and can really get it done. And that is what I bring to the table. And I think once voters get to know me, they will understand that. And they will understand that when I'm state's attorney, it will be a new day in Baltimore. We will get our homicide solve rates up and our conviction rates up and really and truly go after violent repeat offenders. Part of my platform is that I intend to expand the initial review unit. Currently, the prosecutors just check the box for probable cause to see if the officers have alleged what is necessary. They don't actually sit down and review cases. And so what that means is that if the officer has missed something, they will not be able to go back and get that video evidence later on. It also means that weak cases are being charged. So people sit in jail a lot longer on cases that the state will not be able to prove. We need to solve both of those issues. And we do that by working with the police department to make sure that not just homicides are good cases, but that all of the cases that we bring to trial are going to be good cases and that we can really ensure the certainty of conviction for those people who need to be convicted.
Because obviously most of the time the homicide suspect isn't a first-time offender. They didn't just decide to commit a homicide and that's their first act.
Right.
And first contact with the criminal justice system. So in your opinion, and this is a myriad of things, but what do you think went wrong? I mean, the city seemed to have gone through a bunch of changes, but the last 8 years have been tough compared to the preceding 8 years. What do you think has gone wrong here that has put us in this sustained level of violence that we're seeing?
I think it is the issue of politics in the prosecutor's office. When Ms. Mosby came in, it was very clear that that was her chief priority. And a lot of people left, including myself, because of that reason. And she has had a tremendous amount of attrition in that office and hasn't been able to sustain experienced prosecutors. I heard a statistic that of the 217 prosecutors that she inherited from Mr. Bernstein, only 45 or so remain. That means that the vast majority of her office has less than 8 years experience. They just don't know how to efficiently and thoroughly handle these cases. And that means that victims are not being protected. Their cases are not being adequately presented to juries, and the state keeps losing cases. So we do need to bring the experience back to that office in order to actually get convictions on serious cases and serious offenders.
Do you think some of that is training? Do you think some of that is morale? And obviously it's probably a combination, but how is it that you're going to be able to attract people to come into the office where some have gotten a taste of the quote good life outside of the office, doing other things for the last several years that might have left? Why would they want to come back to a burdensome caseload, to pay that might be comparable or even lower than the other jurisdictions compared to the amount of work they have to do?
Well, the state's attorney's office for Baltimore City has one of the highest starting salaries of any state's attorney's office. And most of these state's attorneys have not gone to, some big law firm making tons of money. They have gone to other prosecutors' offices or to the attorney general's office, which are better run or offer different avenues for advancement. We really have to encourage them to come back to the city, to bring their experience back. And for the most part, I hear from prosecutors every single day who have left the office, and they all tell me that they will come back. So I'm not really worried about that particular issue because I know that people want to come back. They just want to come back to an office that they know will put the interests of the citizens of Baltimore and solving these cases first. They don't want to come back to a dysfunctional, mismanaged office that only cares about politics.
So jumping a bit into your policies, under crime plan, you have a pretty bold statement. Basically, gun crime is going to mean jail time. What do you mean by that when you say that? Where are you coming from with that?
Well, most of my experience for 9 of the 12 years I was in the state's attorney's office, I handled murders and shootings. So murders and shootings are, quite frankly, my focus, and it's the focus of most of the citizens of Baltimore. And I think we really need to encourage offenders to drop the guns. Like I said, for the first 3 years of my career, I went around the country training prosecutors on how to establish effective community prosecution and gun violence prevention programs. And a lot of it was messaging and making sure that offenders knew that if you are caught with a gun, you're not going to get a slap on the wrist. You're not going to get to go home that day and continue on like normal. You are going to go to jail, and we are going to build strong cases, and we are going to make sure that gun offenders have consequences so that they leave the gun at home.
Right. So when you look at that issue with the guns, this has been controversial in a lot of ways. Do you believe in taking a bit of the judiciary discretion away from the judges with the implementation of some sort of minimum sentence for a conviction of gun possession in Baltimore?
I think at the moment, our laws are good. You know, the state's the way that the public safety law works now is that the state's attorney has the option of invoking a mandatory minimum. And for the most part, if they have a prior conviction and it's old, we can choose not to do that. We can always choose not to invoke the mandatory minimum. But I think if this is a consistent pattern for people, like their last conviction for a different gun or another violent crime was 2 years ago, yeah, we need to invoke the mandatory minimum in that case. But I've had, I'm a defense attorney now. I have had lots of clients where their qualifying conviction was 20 years ago and they own their own business and are doing great and, have great life. For that guy, we don't need the mandatory minimum on him. We don't need to necessarily send him to jail. We got to look at all of the factors in a person's life and really bring people back into the criminal justice system. Look at everything that they're doing. The case I'm thinking of, the man had taken a gun away from his kid who was out doing bad things. And he was trying to protect the public and take it away from his kid. And the state still asked for the mandatory minimum on that case. Things like that don't make a lot of sense. And we really need to evaluate everything about the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and it's situations like that have the opponents of the mandatory minimum upset. Right. And I totally get that. And it's unfortunate that those few incidents that slip through the cracks allow some hardcore killers to stay on the streets. So it's a bit of a balance there, and it seems like a bit of a common sense balance, but that's something that you all have to figure out for us. And I think that's what the residents of the city want you all to figure out, how to keep the bad guys that are toting these guns and killing the people off the street before they even get to a point of doing it. So with that, you and one of your rivals in this race made some news because you talked about scaling back some of the things that Miss Mosby put in place where she isn't prosecuting things like trespassing or prostitution, et cetera. But you would go back to prosecuting some of those things. Talk to me a bit about that.
Well, I think for the most part, people who commit trespassing or loitering or all of those sorts of things don't need to go to jail, but they do need to be held accountable. And we can do that in a number of ways. And we have to use all of the tools in the toolbox in order to hold offenders accountable. There's this great study out of Philadelphia where it says that for every dollar spent improving vacant lots, you save $26 in gun crime costs. So you reduce violent crime by 50%. You don't have to spend as much money on healthcare for people who get injured, on incarceration and all of those things. You save the community money by improving vacant lots. So I took that idea and I said, okay, how do we make sure that we can improve Baltimore City more and clean up the vacant lots? And my thought was community service. And that for these low-level offenses where we're not trying to ruin somebody's life by giving them a conviction, we can make them go clean up a vacant lot and give back to their community in that way, repay their debt to society. I think we have to look at all sorts of different things. But, I was at a community meeting last week, and there were some individuals there who said that, they have people who are trespassing near a school and they're constantly on the property and the police won't do anything and they're worried for their kids. And all of these things have ripple effects. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't necessarily need that person to go to jail. We just need them to stop trespassing at the school. And we need to enforce that through stay away orders and other things that we can do. But to have a blanket policy where you say, I'm not going to enforce the law, even though I took an oath to uphold the laws of the state of Maryland and the Constitution, does not make a lot of sense to me. And I think we do need to change that and use prosecutorial discretion to achieve the outcome the community wants.
So on that note, it sounds like you wouldn't want to have policies in place in your office that conflict with current Maryland law.
Correct.
Right. And that was a good segue because I actually had a question. I wanted to hear more about that Philadelphia program that they have, which sounds a bit also literally like the broken windows theory of policing from maybe late 90s, early 2000s, and putting people to work. So it sounds like you're saying that you want to be involved a bit more outside the office as well, trying to assist in other ways to get people back to work, or other forms of punishment other than incarceration.
I do want to explore other forms of accountability. Broken windows had this horrible unintended consequence of mass incarceration. I don't intend to bring back any policies that will end up like that, but it did have some good things of rebuilding the community first. And that is something that I do want to do. Like I said, I don't intend to lock everyone up for trespassing, which is what happened under broken windows. But I do intend to find ways to rebuild our community, to address some of these root causes of crime. A lot of my plan focuses on addressing the root causes. The reason for the community service is I want to help address the blight issues in the community, because blight leads to crime. It leads to people feeling like their neighborhood is failing and not wanting to invest in it, and addressing other issues like truancy. We have a 49% chronically truant rate in this city. If 49% of the kids are not in school on a regular basis, how in the world do we expect them to learn? How in the world do we expect them to be able to get jobs later?
And that was actually my next question. You actually have that on your website, that you want to implement a truancy program. I'm curious what that would look like from the state's attorney office perspective. Tell me more about that. You were getting into it.
So I think, there's different things that we can do. When I was in juvenile, we had several people would call us a couple times a week and say, I think my kid might be going down the bad path. He was a really sweet kid, but now he's starting to hang out on the corner more. He's hanging out with people I don't like. Like, do you have anything that can help him? And we would say, no, we don't get involved until there's been an arrest. And I think that is exactly the wrong philosophy. And I think if the state's attorney's office had resources and could send out a social worker to meet with the family and figure out what was going on with the kid, why he wasn't wanting to go to school or why he was starting to head down this path, and stop it before they even get arrested and connect them with services before anything bad happens, we can help stem juvenile crime. But I also think, a lot of times the parents are complicit. They're not necessarily parenting. They're not forcing the kids to go to school. They're not even really encouraging the kids to go to school sometimes. And I think it is important to look at what issues are going on there, to perhaps charge them and say, okay, what is wrong? Is it the child? Is it you? Do you have a substance abuse problem? Do you need help with that? Are you just working too many jobs and need some other form of assistance to make sure that the child is going to school? We have tools. We have methods of solving this problem. It just takes an acknowledgement and a willingness to use those creative solutions to solve the problem and enable parents to make sure that their kids are in school and not running the streets.
Yeah. I like it. It sounds good. But I wonder where the money comes from and where does the personnel come from to be able to do it. Quite frankly, we've seen and we've heard plans to address like the squeegee issue. Recently was on the streets and I saw just as many squeegee people on the streets as before the programs were announced. The wraparounds are great in theory. How do we truly implement them, and where does the funding come from to actually make it happen?
I don't think the funding will be an issue, and here's why. Under Greg Bernstein, there was a $35 million approximate budget for the state's attorney's office. He had 217 prosecutors with $35 million. Miss Mosby has a $48 million budget, a 35% increase in budget, and yet she only has 167 prosecutors. So I don't know what is happening with the extra $13 million and, the $5 million that would have accounted for the 50 prosecutors that are no longer there. But it seems to me that if your budget has gone up 35%, that there is room in that budget for prosecutors to handle truancy court, to pay for a social worker to go out and implement these programs. It won't take that many people, but it will take a willingness to allocate resources towards that and address the root issues of crime.
It makes me wonder, like, these, I hate to say they seem basic. We hear it often during election season about the wraparound services. And then when the rubber meets the road, I think that's where we wonder what happened to that. What happened to those ideas and those programs? So hopefully, if you happen to be the one who is elected and sworn in, that can happen, because I think people want to see that, especially when it comes to juveniles. When it comes to low-level offenses, we have to have the outlet to send the people to. If we don't, it just makes it difficult.
I want to do other things like a women's empowerment court to address issues of trauma, because there have been studies that have shown 80 to 90% of women who are incarcerated have been victims of domestic or sexual assault. And they have trauma issues related to that. And when you recognize that statistic is so high, particularly for the female population, and, a lot of our women are mothers, and they have other issues related to that and getting services and other things in place for their children. And I think that a women's empowerment court, which specifically addressed gender issues and issues of sexual assault and the trauma related to that, I think will help to improve the lives of these women and hopefully their children as well.
Well, that's admirable, and obviously something very necessary. When it comes to the police accountability and the consent decree and working through that, what are your thoughts on how you can manage the relationship of the necessity of holding police accountable if they find themselves on the wrong side of the law, but managing that relationship that's necessary as well to prosecute the cases and build the good cases to keep the people off the street that are trying to harm others?
As you know, nobody hates a bad cop as much as a good cop, right? Police do not want anybody committing these crimes in their department. It gives a bad name to every officer who's trying to do good work out there. And I don't think that it will damage relationships with the police to hold the bad officers accountable. I'm the only candidate among everyone who has personally tried and convicted a retired police officer for shooting an unarmed man. I was personally prosecuting a police officer for a double homicide. I have a proven track record of holding police accountable when they need to be held accountable, and also with working with police to make sure that the cases are strong and to have those relationships. I've been around the city for 20 years now, maybe more than that, and a lot of the detectives who I worked with as a young prosecutor are now the command staff. And so, we already have those built-in relationships where you can go to them and say, you have a problem, we're going to solve this problem now. And I also think that we need to work more closely with the state prosecutor and with the attorney general's office, but more the state prosecutor, because they're more set up to do that, to hold police accountable and to make sure that those cases are thoroughly prosecuted.
And what do you think about working with our federal partners and sending more cases to the feds here in Baltimore?
I respect the feds, absolutely. And they did, a tremendous job with the gun trace task force and rooting out all of the corruption that was related to that. I think they're probably still working on a few things there. So I certainly, don't have a problem in working with the federal government. I think that the state prosecutor is the office that is designed in Maryland to handle cases involving police.
All right. Well, it's going to be an interesting next several months. You get the longer race because the primary is in July, but you're going all the way through the home stretch, which is November. I have to ask, did the fact that another contender who ended up being Thuroo Vignarajah getting into the race for the Democratic primary play a role into you opting to run as an independent?
Well, I actually announced that I was switching to independent several weeks before he entered the race.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. And I guess it could be quite interesting as well for you, where you're going to be on the ballot. I think there are a few things you have to do to make sure you're on the ballot, but
we're going to be on the ballot.
I'm sure you're going to be on the ballot. And Ms. Mosby still has a lot in front of her with the legal challenges.
Right.
That could set up a very interesting place for you in November. So are you ready and prepared for all that there's going to be throughout this summer? And then as you get towards that race, because your competition is going to be either Ms. Mosby, Mr. Bates, or Mr. Vignarajah from July 19th through November. Are you ready for that?
I am absolutely ready for that. You know, like I said at the very beginning, I have twice as much prosecutorial experience as any of them. So, you know, to me, it doesn't really matter who it is. I just have more experience and more ideas on how to fix the system and how to fix Baltimore. And so that's what we're going to keep moving forward on and keep hammering that message on.
Well, where can people find out more about the plans you have for the state's attorney's office?
My website is electroyahanna.com, ROYAHANNA.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully people got a bit more insight into what you will bring. You obviously have the experience, and you're going to be part of those personalities that already exist. The newcomer in this rematch of sorts from 2018. So good luck to you the rest of the way. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you all as well for joining us on this special edition of the To Be More podcast.
Thanks for having me.